multiply and divide integers is pretty easy. There aren't a whole lot of rules. In fact, there's only one rule. Whereas if we review, let's go back to adding integers, we had if they're the same sign, you have to find the sum, keep the sign. So like if they're both positive, the answer's positive. If they're both negative, the answer's negative. That's addition. If you're adding and they're different signs, you have to find the difference, you have to subtract, and then the number with the greatest distance, absolute value, that's the one that wins, right? So 17 has the larger absolute value, so that's why it's positive. Negative 28 has the larger absolute value, that's why it's negative. So adding has two rules. Then in subtracting, we had our double negative. You can't have a double negative. A double negative makes a positive. So we're going on to multiplying and dividing integers. And again, they have a different rule, and this is where, unfortunately, people start getting confused. They mix up their rules. Sam, face the front, please. So my first thing I want you to do is I want you to just forget the signs. I just want you to multiply and divide the numbers. So the first thing I want you to do, I just want you to do the math. Don't worry about the signs. Just do the math. So if you're given a problem like 3 times or negative 3 times 4, forget about the signs. Forget that there's a negative. Forget that there's a positive. What is 3 times 4? 12. We'll add the sign in later. If you have negative 25 divided by negative 5, forget the sign. Don't worry about it. What's 25 divided by 5? 5. If you have 1/2 times negative 10, don't worry about the negative 10, right? Just what's 1/2 times 10? What's half of 10? 5. Again, don't worry. Just do the math. Can you handle that part?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nothing new. So the sign part is the next part. Adding in the signs, and there are two ways you want to look at it. Now we're going to add in the correct sign, and here are the rules. A positive times a positive. Have you ever done that before?
Yeah.
All the time, right? What does it equal? A positive. A negative times a negative equals a positive. And that's that rule again from yesterday, you guys. Remember, if you have, let me find my strips of paper. If you have two pieces of line, a negative and a negative, now here's the confusing part though. See how they're touching? But there's an operation between them. So if it's multiplication or division, two negatives, again, make a positive. Two negative signs are used together to make a positive. The only time this rule is not true is when. When do two negatives make a negative? We already learned the rule. When you're adding. A negative plus a negative equals a negative. But every other time, two negatives make a positive. So these are positive answers. So what do you think makes a negative answer? A positive negative makes a negative. And a negative positive makes a negative. Here's another way of thinking about the correct sign. Draw a triangle, and I'm going to put its feet at the bottom. So we have a negative, and a positive. These are its feet, this is its head. Negative, negative, positive. It always looks like this. If you draw your triangle looking some other way, you're in trouble. Here's how I remember. I've got 1 point at the top and 2 at the bottom, so I have to break up a plus sign into 2 parts. A positive times a positive is a positive. You don't need to know that. But a negative times a negative, if I go down to my triangle and I cover up my negative times a negative, what's left open? A positive, which is your answer. If I have a positive times a negative, I take my fingers and I cover up positive and 1 negative, what's left over? A negative, which is your answer. If I have a negative and a positive, I cover up a negative and a positive. What's left over? A negative. Here's another way of remembering it. An even number of negatives equals a positive. We have 2 negatives, so my answer is a positive. In this problem, I have 1 negative, so my answer is a negative. So an odd number of negatives equals a negative. There's all kinds of ways of remembering this. The crummy part about operations with integers is, yes, you just have to memorize all the rules. You have to remember if the signs are the same when you're adding, find the sum, keep the sign. If you're adding and the signs are different, find the difference, greatest distance. If you're subtracting, you have to remember double negative. Make it into an addition problem. If you're multiplying and dividing, you need to remember one of these things. This is the one that I tend to remember. An even number of negatives makes a positive. An odd number of negatives makes a negative. That's Mrs. Long's favorite. Some people like the picture, the triangle, because it makes more sense. So let's go back up to problem number 1. Negative 3 times 4. You pick which one you want to do. Negative 3 times positive 4. There's an odd number of negatives. Or I can look down here, it's a negative times a positive. So it's not just 12, it's negative 12. Negative 25 divided by negative 5. You pick which rule you want for the sign. Are you going to do negative, negative, cover them up? Are you going to do an even number of negatives, or are you going to come over here and say a negative and a negative make a positive? Whichever one you want is fine. And 1/2 times negative 10. Again, you pick which way you want to remember it. Is negative 5. The only way to get good at this is memorize the rules. Let me try a big old problem. Are you ready? I love the enthusiasm. We're going to do negative 10 times 2 divided by negative 5 times negative 4. Oops, I said negative and I didn't write a negative. Again, left to right, is that correct? Addition, subtraction, left to right, multiplication, division from left to right. Multiply, divide, multiply. It's all interchangeable. So let's start from the left and go to the right. Negative 10 times 2. Well, what's 10 times 2? 20. And then you have to pick one of these ways. Is it positive 20 or negative 20? Negative 20. Divided by negative 5 times negative 4. Negative 20 divided by negative 5. Forget the signs. 20 divided by 5 is 4. You pick which one tells us positive or negative 4. Two negatives make a positive. Positive 4 times negative 4. 4 times 4 is 16. You pick which one you want. Is it positive or negative? Negative. That seemed too easy for you. Let's put all the rules together. Okay, hold on. I have to make this work, so give me a second. Negative 2 plus negative 4 minus negative 3 minus 10 times 8 divided by 2. That bracket means we have to do the addition and subtraction part first. Oops, negative 8, negative 2. They're like parentheses, they're just fancier. So this whole problem is going to be done left to right. Are we ready? Okay. Negative 2 plus negative 4. Who can tell me the rule? Sam. If the signs are the same, negative, negative, find the sum, add them together, keep the sign. Correct. So 2 plus 4 is 6. Keep the sign so they're both negative. Then I'm going to write down minus negative 3 minus 10 times negative 8 divided by negative 2. All right, let's keep going. Negative 6 minus negative 3. Who can tell me this rule? Morgan? It's a double negative. A double negative cancels out, becomes positive. Now I have negative 6 plus 3. Morgan, what's the rule now? If the signs are different, negative and positive, find the difference, subtract. What's 6 minus 3? And which one has a greater absolute value? Negative 6. Minus 10 times negative 8 divided by negative 2. All right, this is piggybacking on yesterday. Anyone remember what to do with negative 3 and negative 10? Here's how I remember it. The signs are the same, right? I mean, I get it. This is a positive 10, but it's minus 10. So isn't that the same thing as negative 10? Yeah. The signs are the same. Because I can really put a plus sign in there and nothing happened. It didn't change the problem. I can prove it to you. Negative 3 minus 10 and negative 3 plus negative 10. It didn't change. It's the same problem. So negative 3 plus negative 10 or negative 3 minus 10, the signs are the same. Find the sum, keep the sign, times negative 8 divided by negative 2. Forget the signs. What's 8 times 3? Carry the 2. What's 8 times 1? Plus 2. Is it positive or negative? You pick the rule. 2 negatives make a positive. Divided by negative 2. What's 10 divided by 2? What's 4 divided by 2? So 52, is it positive 52 or negative 52? Which one? Negative. I would keep these notes handy at all times when you're doing these problems.